If you're trying to pay off debt, Velocity Banking can be a great solution. Now they have a home equity line of credit and they also have credit cards that we can use. Our goal by doing this is freeing up all the cash flow here. Let's take a look at their income and expenses. Their monthly income is $11,412 and their total expenses are $9,512. This means they have about $1,900 left over that they can use to pay down some of these debts. Now remember, if we're using the home equity line of credit to free up cash flow, this is going to free up $702 because we're going to be paying the entire income almost into the equity line of credit, which does cancel out that minimum payment of $702. So the monthly expenses will go from $9,512 down to $8,810, and the cash flow left over would now be $2,602. What I would do in this situation is use the home equity line of credit, but then I would also use the credit cards. So all the expenses that we usually would consider a cash expense will actually be paid directly out of the home equity line of credit. And then anything that is not a cash expense, all the other expenses here, would go back onto the credit cards. If we use the home equity line of credit and the credit cards, this is going to help our credit score increase faster because the balances on the cards will report lower. Then they also had $300 that is going into savings. With the savings, we can either put this into the home equity line and leave it there to have the balance go down faster, or we can put it in and take it back out and put it in a separate savings account. Let me show you what all of this looks like. So month one on the home equity line of credit, we started with a balance of $88,099. Then we go in and pay $11,412, which is the total amount of our income, into the line of credit. And remember, this is what eliminates that monthly payment because we're paying $11,000 into the line of credit and the payment was only $702. Then we're also going to be charged interest on whatever the balance is on our home equity line of credit. So let's say that that's $700 for this first month. Then remember, we said all of these expenses here were going to be paid with the credit cards. So we need to figure out the total amount that we need to pay to the cards, which in this case is $4,603. Then we're also going to be charged interest on those balances. So let's say we need to add another $300 to account for the interest. This would mean we need to pay a total of $4,903 to those cards. So we're going to round up just a little bit here and say that we're going to pay $5,000 to the cards to have those balances go down slightly just at first. Then we also go in with the home equity line and we pay these cash expenses here. And you can do these things really in any order. I would probably pay the cash expenses first. And let's say the $300 for savings we're going to have come out of the equity line and we're going to put it in a separate savings account. So $300 of the cash expenses is savings. So we went in and paid all of the bills with the equity line. Now the balance starting in month two is $86,322. So the balance on the equity line is going to go up and down as we continue to do this month by month. But remember, we're paying everything into the equity line of credit and we're taking all of the bills and spending out of the line of credit. So then in month two, we go in and we do the same thing. We pay the $11,412. Now the balance on the line of credit is going to go down again. Then we go back in and we put all that spending back onto the line. Remember, your interest charge on an equity line is based off of the daily balance. So let's say that's $610. Then we go back in and we're going to pay $5,000 again to the credit cards. Remember, that covers everything that we're spending on those, plus a little tiny bit extra for the balances to go down. Then same thing with the cash expenses. We have $3,935 coming out for those. This included the mortgages, the car loans, the RV, the solar, and $300 for savings. Now, if you wanted to leave your savings in the equity line to have the balance go down faster, instead of putting it in savings, you would only be paying out $3,635 for those remaining cash expenses. Now, after we've made all our monthly payments in month two, month three, the balance starts at $84,455. Now, after the income goes in, the balance goes back down to $73,043. Then we go back in and we do all of that other spending plus the interest. And you can see the interest amount is getting lower every month as the balance on the equity line is going down. So for this third month here, it may only be $590. It does depend on the interest rate. Then same thing here, we're going to pay $5,000 to the credit cards to cover the $4,600 that needs to go back on them, plus the $300 for interest. And again, we're going to pay $3,935 for the cash expenses and the savings. Now month four, the balance is at $83,568 at the start of the month. So you can see the balance is going down as we're paying and using this line of credit to pay all of these bills. At some point, you're going to free up enough money on the equity line that you're going to be able to go in and use even more of it to pay down the debts even faster. So now in month four, after we pay the income into the line of credit, we're at a balance of $72,156. Now let's say we want to up the amount that we're going to pay to the credit cards. So again, as always, we're going to have to pay interest on the balance. Now let's say we're going to pay $6,000 to the credit cards instead of just $5,000. Now we'll be knocking out larger chunks of the credit cards by paying more to those. Now, the last couple months, we were paying $5,000 to the credit cards, and in that case, we only had the balances on the cards going down about $97 per month. So now that we're changing the payment and paying $6,000 per month, the balances on those cards should be going down around $1,097 per month. So that's going to be better. Now we have the balances on the credit cards going down faster. Then we go back in. Remember, we're paying cash expenses. And even though we paid extra to the credit cards this month, the balance on the equity line is still going down as well. Now let's take a look at month 5. We have the balance on the equity line at $82,671. Now at this point, we've freed up quite a bit of available credit by paying this equity line this way for a couple months. So at this point, we've paid that equity line balance down a considerable amount. So let's go in and see if we can pay off the remaining balances on all of the credit cards. So we know we have the interest coming out, and then we're going to go in and pay the cash expenses, which did include $300 for savings. Remember, at the beginning of this month, we started with a balance of $82,671. We paid the income in. The balance went down to $71,259. When we started using the equity line, we started with a balance of $88,099. So it's gone down quite a bit. So let's go into our equity line and pay $11,000 to the remaining balances on the credit cards. This should pay them off completely. If not, it will be very close to doing so. So now our balance on our equity line is going to go up quite a bit again. So it's going to go back up to $86,769, but we paid off the credit cards completely. So after only 5 months, we paid enough down on the home equity line that we could go in and pay off the credit cards completely. Now remember, we were still using the credit cards to pay some of our other expenses. So now that's the only amount that we're going to have to pay. So we need to go in and look and find out what amount that was. So month number 6, this is our starting balance. We go in again and we pay $11,412, which was the total amount of the income. So then the balance goes back down a considerable amount. Then we're also charged interest still. It's probably going to go up a little bit because the balance has gotten higher since we went in and paid off the credit cards. Our cash expenses stayed the same at $3,935. Now with the credit cards, we were paying $4,903. We no longer have to pay that because we don't have to account for interest. So now we only need to pay $4,603 to account for all of those bills. So we're going to pay $4,600, we're going to spend $4,600. We don't have to pay any extra to pay down the balances on the cards anymore because now they're completely paid off. Now month 7, we're starting at $84,513. And from here on out, that's all we have to pay to the credit cards is the $4,600 for the bills that we're putting on those cards. So every month we're just going in, we're paying our entire income into the line of credit. Then we're going in and we're doing our spending, but the balance on the line is going down because we're not using that full amount. Now let's look at everything we've accomplished by month number 8. So remember, we were taking $300 out of this here and it was going into a savings account. So at this point, we've been putting up $300 a month, which is 8 months of savings, which would be $2,400. We also have the balance on the equity line still getting lower, and we paid off those credit card balances in month 5. So as long as we stick to what we have planned for our spending, we've made a lot of progress in just 8 months. So now that we have some money in savings, we've paid off the credit cards, maybe we want to look at using the equity line to pay extra to another debt that we have. So again, the same thing's going to happen here. We're going to be charged some interest. Again, that interest amount is going down because we're paying down the balance still. We have the cash expenses coming out, which those were the same amount. Then we're still paying $4,600 to the credit cards because that's what our spending was on those. Now let's look at our other debts to see what we could pay extra to here. So the balance on the auto loan is a little bit higher than what the solar loan is, but if we look at the monthly payments, it would make more sense to start paying off that auto 2 loan first because the payment is so much larger. So let's say in addition to that payment, we pay an extra $1,000 to that auto loan number 2. So now we're doing the same thing like we did with the first couple months when we were paying the credit card balances down an extra $1,000. And we still have the balance on the equity line going down as well. The payment on auto loan number 2 was $734 when we started, but now we're going to go in and add $1,000 to that payment. So the balance on this car loan will now be going down very fast. So this is going to pay it off a lot faster than just paying the $734 minimum payment. Then again, we'll eventually get to a point where we can do what we did with the credit cards, take out a large lump sum to pay off the remaining balance on the car loan. And you can really go in and take those large lump sums out whenever it makes sense. So right now we would be at a balance of about $81,000. The limit on the equity line is $92,000. So we could still, again, go in and take about $11,000 out and pay that to the car if we wanted to. Or we could keep paying the $1,734 for a couple months, free up even more money on the equity line, and then go in and take out the lump sum to pay off the car. As we start paying off these loan balances, we're going to free up even more cash flow. So after the car is paid off, we free up an additional $734 that this is just going to pay that equity line down even faster. So remember, those cash expenses coming out of the equity line were $3,935. After we pay off the car, it's only going to be $3,201. And remember, $300 of that is still going to savings every month. But anyway, I think you guys probably understand what I'm saying here. This is really a great tool to pay off your debt faster. And remember, you can use the equity line alone. You don't have to use the credit cards, but if you do use the credit cards, it is going to help your credit score increase faster because those balances will report lower. Now let's look at our spreadsheet to see what this would look like in the Velocity Credit Card Cash Flow Planner. If we want to use a spreadsheet with the home equity line, we would put that in the credit card payment column, and we would put that it has a $0 minimum payment. Because remember, we're paying all of this cash flow here that's available to the credit cards. We're paying $10,972 to that equity line. And the number we were paying into it here is a little bit different depending on how you play with your cash expenses. So after looking at it again, I assume anything that's going to the church has to be paid with cash, and then we could also consider that savings a cash expense instead of putting it into the line first. But again, there are multiple ways to do all of this. So if we're using the home equity line, instead of putting our mortgages and things like that as a cash expense, we would say that we're paying it with card number 2, which is where we have the HELOC. Same thing with our loan payments here. We would have all of those going onto the HELOC, which in this case would be card number 1. Normally, all these expenses would be cash expenses, but if we're using a HELOC, we do have to account for that in this spreadsheet, and this would be the way that I would do it. Now, this is also going to be slightly different when we're actually looking at how we're paying the credit cards. The first thing we would have to do is make sure that the amount that we're paying to the HELOC, or in this case, card number 1, matches up to that number that we had at the top of the other page. So we would add whatever amount we need to here to make that number match. Now, these numbers at the top of this page here will not add up correctly if we're using a HELOC, so you can just ignore those if you are using a HELOC. Now let's make sure we had those numbers match, and yes, they do, so that's what we wanted. Then if we go back and look at the cash flow planner, we can go in and look at all the credit cards and figure out how we're going to pay those. And one more thing here with the HELOC, it is going to show you, and actually I put these numbers backwards, but it's going to show you the utilization on your HELOC. It technically is a revolving line of credit, but you don't really have to worry about this if you're using a HELOC as a credit card for this spreadsheet. Now, if we look down here, we have the balance on the HELOC going down around $5,800 per month, but remember, we're going to pay most of this to the credit cards. So for the paychecks up here at the top, we have the first 2 paychecks, which all of that is getting paid to the equity line, which we have listed as credit card number 1. Then the money coming out of the equity line, we would just consider it another paycheck. So we're going to put that amount here. And then we can see how much we have coming off of the cards and how much we have additional that we can pay to them. Remember, the $5,000 that we have coming out of the home equity line is going to be paid to the credit cards. Then we'll turn around and use the credit cards to pay these other bills over here. So then we would select which credit card we're going to use for each of those bills. And theirs is a little bit different because their credit card statement dates are really close together here. So what I would probably do here is use credit card number 2 for anything that's due after the 12th. So after that statement closes, then I would use credit card number 4 for anything from the 1st up until about the 15th of the month. Now you can go in and play with these numbers. You can always just use one card if you want to. If you are doing that, be very careful because they can lower your limit. They can also lower your limit on a HELOC, so that's another thing that we have to watch out for. But then if we go back to the cash flow planner, it's going to show us the amount that we're going to have to spend back on each one of the cards. As long as we put the balance, the limit, and the interest rate, it's going to estimate the amount that we have to pay for interest, and then we can add an additional payment if we need to based off of this number right here. Now, if we look at card number 3, we didn't have anything going back on it. We need to at least make sure we make the minimum payment, which I think for this card was $30. So if you're not using a credit card for the month, you have to make sure that the total amount to pay covers the minimum payment. So in this case, I had an additional payment in here, but let's say we add $7. That would make the total $31 to pay. So this would cover that minimum payment. But again, you can go in and add an additional amount if you want that balance to go down even more, and you can do this for all of the cards, and it'll calculate up there in the paycheck planner. And then we would go in and look at card number 4, add the additional payment, make sure your balance and limit are in there, but it shows you the amount that you're going to have to pay, and you can switch which paycheck you're going to use to pay each of these credit cards. But again, if you're using the spreadsheet and you're wanting to use it with a HELOC, this is probably the best way to do it. Just consider it a credit card and have it as a 0 payment. Now, if you wanted to only use the HELOC and not use the credit cards, you would just have every expense being paid out of that home equity line of credit. So card number 1 in this case would be our home equity line. There's actually a couple different ways that you can use the spreadsheet to do this with a home equity line of credit. It does make it just a little bit more confusing because we are considering it a credit card. And one last thing you could do, you could have more of these expenses being paid with the HELOC, but then also pay some with the credit cards. So maybe you want to pay all of your fixed expenses with your HELOC, but then things that change from month to month, like your gas or food, maybe you want to put those on a credit card. So there are multiple ways that you could use the HELOC or the credit cards while you're doing Velocity banking. And if you prefer this spreadsheet in a chart form, this is the same as the credit card cash flow planner. The only difference is it does not calculate the paychecks. You do not need to use both. You can pick one or the other. But anyway, as always, let me know if you have any questions about anything that we went over.